You'll take the bus to your ceremony. We're buying your sister a Bentley.
Be responsible, Olivia. Don't be dramatic. A bus for me. A Bentley for her. Understood. I collapsed from exhaustion. The bill is $1,805. I need help. Just this once. Jenny Gaines.
We'll set up a $30 million trust for Chloe. It's family.
Family. When I needed $1,850 in a hospital bed, you sent me a lesson.
Don't twist this.
No.
They don't have access to me anymore.
Good. Now toast to your next move.
I'm Olivia Williams, 22 years old, and in 1 week, I will graduate from Harvard Business School. After 4 years of working 3 jobs to pay my own way, this should have been the proudest moment of my life. But when I called my parents to finalize the plans, the reality hit me like a ton of bricks. My father's voice was cold and dismissive over the phone as he said, "You'll have to take the bus to your ceremony. We're buying your sister a Bentley." A Bentley for her high school graduation. The sting of those words left me completely breathless, standing alone on a street corner in Cambridge. But I had no idea that just a few days later, during that very ceremony, a single announcement would make my father literally drop his program in shock. If you've ever felt overlooked by the people who should support you most, let me know where you're watching from. And make sure you hit like and subscribe, because you are not going to want to miss seeing their faces when they finally realize who I have become. When I stepped onto the Harvard campus, the door to my life in Connecticut felt like it had slammed shut behind me. There was a strange sense of liberation mixed with the sorrow of my family's lukewarm send-off, but I had no time to dwell on it. Survival was the priority. Harvard isn't cheap, and my scholarship only covered tuition. Everything else? Housing, books, food? That was on me. My life quickly became a relentless grind. While my classmates were joining final clubs, networking at mixers, or planning weekend ski trips, I was working. Not 1 job, but 3. My mornings started before sunrise inside a campus coffee shop, where the smell of roasting beans and the buzz of the grinder became my alarm clock. Between classes, I was a blur on a beat-up bicycle, delivering food around Harvard Square, rain or shine. My evenings were spent in the quiet sanctuary of Widener Library, not always studying for my own classes, but tutoring freshmen who were struggling with Economics 101. On Friday nights, while my dorm echoed with music and the laughter of people getting ready for parties, I was at a retail store in Cambridge, folding sweaters and smiling at customers. Sleep became a luxury. Ramen noodles became a primary food group. I became an expert at finding on-campus events that offered free pizza. My existence was a stark contrast to what I knew my peers were experiencing. I'd overhear them talking about spring break in Cancun, about the monthly allowances their parents sent them. I saw their designer clothes and their brand new laptops. Meanwhile, I was using duct tape to patch up the hole in my only pair of sneakers. The loneliness was profound. It felt like watching a movie about the college experience that everyone else was starring in, while I was just a passerby looking in through the window. But in that isolation, something began to grow. I didn't have time for distractions, so I poured myself into my work with a singular, ferocious intensity. And for the first time in my life, someone noticed. Not because I was their daughter or because they felt obligated. They noticed because of the work itself. Her name was Professor Wilson. She taught a financial technology course I took in my junior year. She was a small woman with a razor-sharp intellect and glasses that were always perched on the end of her nose. She wasn't one for easy praise. After I turned in a paper analyzing emerging trends in digital payment systems, she asked me to stay after class. I was sure I had done something wrong. She held up my paper, its pages covered in her red-inked notes. "This paper," she said, looking me straight in the eye, "is graduate-level work, Olivia. You have a phenomenal mind." Those words? They were like rain after a decade-long drought. Validation. Pure, unadulterated validation. It wasn't a distracted nod. It was real. That was the moment a seed was planted. Under her guidance, I dove headfirst into the world of cryptocurrency and blockchain technology. This was 2019, and while much of the world was still skeptical, I saw an ocean of potential. I spent hours, entire nights, in the library, not tutoring, but teaching myself to code, devouring white papers, trying to find the flaws in existing systems. And then, the idea came. Not in a flash of lightning, but more like the answer to a puzzle I'd been working on for months. A platform that could make crypto transactions as secure as traditional banking, but faster and more accessible. I called it SecurePay. Professor Wilson urged me to enter the Harvard Business School's annual startup competition. "You've identified a genuine gap in the market," she told me. "This could be significant." I worked tirelessly. I built a prototype, wrote a 50-page business plan, and rehearsed my pitch hundreds of times to my best friend, Jessica. The night before the competition, I almost backed out, crippled by exhaustion and self-doubt. But then I thought of my parents' indifference, and a fire ignited inside me. The next day, I pitched to a panel of venture capitalists and professors. I talked about the tech, the market, and my vision. When they announced SecurePay as the winner, I couldn't believe it. The prize was $50,000 in seed funding and an office in the university's Innovation Center. It was more money than I had ever seen in my life. But more than that, it was validation. It came from strangers, from experts, from people who owed me nothing. That win got attention. An angel investor named Michael Chen, a legend in the tech world, invited me to lunch. After I explained my vision, he made an offer that left me stunned. "I'll give you $2 million for the whole concept right now," he said. "You can finish your degree with no financial worries." $2 million. It could solve every problem I had. It would pay off my student loans, buy me a condo, and let me sleep. The old part of me, the girl who craved security, screamed for me to take it. But a new voice, a stronger one, spoke up. "Thank you," I heard myself say, "but I'm not looking to sell. I believe in what I'm building." Michael Chen smiled. The next day, he called with a different offer, $500,000 for a 15% stake in SecurePay. This time, I accepted. That evening, I had a brief video call with my family. It was Chloe's birthday. They were at a fancy restaurant, the sound of laughter and clinking glasses in the background. "How are classes, sweetie?" my mother asked, her distraction obvious. "Everything's fine," I replied, keeping my voice even. "I'm just busy with a school project." "That's good," my father said. "Keep up the hard work." And that was it, a school project. They had no idea that project had just been valued at over $3 million. They had no idea that the daughter they assumed was just scraping by was quietly building an empire. And I decided, in that moment, to keep it that way. SecurePay was no longer a project to win their approval. It had become my secret weapon. It was the proof that I didn't need them, and it would be the one thing that, one day, they would be unable to ignore. The months that followed that first round of funding were a blur of impossible deadlines, exhilarating breakthroughs, and profound exhaustion. Life as a full-time Harvard student was already demanding. Life as a full-time student and a startup CEO felt like trying to sprint a marathon. My cramped office in the Innovation Center became my real home. The two brilliant computer science students I hired became my platoon. We were fueled by cheap pizza, lukewarm coffee, and a shared belief that we were building something that could change the world. Sleep was a casualty of war. My social life was non-existent. My world shrank until it consisted only of two things: my coursework and the endless lines of code that made up SecurePay. Jessica, my best friend, would often find me asleep at my desk, my cheek pressed against the keyboard, surrounded by empty cans of Red Bull. "Olivia, you can't keep this up," she'd plead, her voice laced with genuine worry. "You're going to burn yourself out." I would just wave her off, promising I'd rest after the next big deadline, after the next product milestone. But the next milestone always led to another. We were in a race against time, against our dwindling bank account, against the established players who were starting to notice the ripples we were making. My rare calls home became even rarer and shorter. They were always the same. I'd ask how they were, and they'd give me a brief, polite update before immediately pivoting. The conversation was never about me. It was a monologue about Chloe. Chloe got an A on her history paper. Chloe was named captain of the cheer squad. Chloe was applying to UCLA, and my father was using all his alumni connections to ensure she got in. My life, my struggles, my secret, growing success. It was all just a footnote. "Oh, that's nice, dear," my mother would say distractedly when I mentioned passing a difficult exam. "Did we tell you Chloe is thinking of getting a new car? Her Audi is starting to feel a little dated." Dated. The car was 2 years old. My Honda Civic was 15. The breaking point didn't come with a bang. It came in the dead silence of the library, 3 weeks before my final exams. We had discovered a critical flaw in our security protocol, a tiny vulnerability that could unravel everything we had built. For 3 straight days, 72 hours, I didn't sleep. My team and I worked around the clock, fueled by nothing but adrenaline and the sheer terror of failure. We fixed it, deploying the patch just hours before it could be exploited. The wave of relief was so immense, it felt like a physical force. And then, as I stood up from the terminal, the world tilted sideways. The fluorescent lights of the library's ceiling smeared into streaks of white. And then, nothing. I woke up to the steady, rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor and the sterile smell of antiseptic. I was in the University Health Center. A kind-faced doctor told me I had collapsed from severe exhaustion and dehydration. My body had simply quit. As they hooked me up to an IV drip, the relief of the crisis we had averted was replaced by a new, cold dread. I was okay, physically. But then the nurse handed me the discharge paperwork, and I saw the estimated bill. Even with my student insurance, my share was $1,850. $1,850. To me, at that moment, it might as well have been $1 million. Every single dollar I had was tied up in secure pay. My personal bank account had less than $200 in it. I stared at the number, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a genuine, paralyzing panic. I was trapped. And so, I did the one thing I had sworn to myself I would never do again. I swallowed my pride, a bitter, metallic taste in my mouth, and I called home. It was the lowest I had ever felt. My hands were trembling as I dialed the number. My mother answered, her voice bright and cheerful. "Mom?" I started, my own voice sounding weak and thin, a stranger's voice. "It's me. Listen, everything is okay, but I'm in the hospital. I collapsed from exhaustion. I'm fine, really. They're letting me go soon. It's just, there's a medical bill, and I can't pay it. I just need a little help. Just this once." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for an eternity. I could hear her muffled voice speaking to my father in the background. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. Annoyance, inconvenience. When she came back on the line, the warmth in her voice was gone, replaced by a cool, clinical detachment. The voice of a neurologist, not a mother. "Olivia," she said, her tone level. "Your father and I have been concerned about your work habits. You need to learn how to manage your stress better. We think this will be an important lesson for you in self-care and financial responsibility." I couldn't process what she was saying. A lesson? I was in a hospital bed. A lesson? Mom, I don't have the money. I literally don't have it. Don't be dramatic, dear, she chided, her voice dripping with condescension. You have jobs, don't you? Perhaps you can arrange a payment plan with the hospital. It's what responsible adults do. Responsible adults. The words echoed in the sterile room. I thought of the endless nights, the sacrifices, the weight of a company on my shoulders. And then, she delivered the final blow, the one that would sever the last threadbare cord connecting me to them. Now, I have to run, she said, a sudden, jarring cheerfulness returning to her voice. We're actually on our way to a horse auction in Wellington. Chloe needs a new jumper for her polo team, and the season is starting soon. She's so excited. You try and get some rest, okay? Bye now. Click. The line went dead. I slowly lowered the phone from my ear and stared at the white acoustic tiles of the ceiling. The rhythmic beeping of the monitor was the only sound. $1,850 for my health was a lesson in responsibility. A new polo pony, an animal that would easily cost $40,000 or $50,000, probably more, was a necessity for my sister. It wasn't just that they said no. It was the ease with which they dismissed my crisis. It was the casual cruelty of comparing my desperation to my sister's hobby. In that moment, something inside me didn't just break. It calcified. It turned into something hard and cold and unbreakable. The last flicker of hope that they might one day see me, truly see me, was extinguished. I wasn't their daughter. I was a problem to be managed, an inconvenience, an investment that had failed to yield the right kind of returns. At this point in the story, I honestly don't have the words to describe that feeling, that absolute soul-crushing realization. If you are feeling as outraged as I am right now, help me out and comment with one word that describes their actions, because that outrage, it didn't crush me. Instead, that cold, hard thing in my chest became a source of fuel. A cold fusion reactor of pure, unadulterated resolve. I would never be in this position again. I would never be weak. I would never, ever ask them for anything again. I wiped the single angry tear from my eye, picked up my phone, and made a different call. Not to a parent, but to a partner. To Jessica. She was there in 20 minutes, not with judgment or lessons, but with a container of homemade soup and $500 in cash she pulled from her own meager savings. And together, we figured it out. And I went back to work. Not just with passion anymore, but with a vengeance. After Jessica left that night, leaving behind the soup, the cash, and a piece of her unwavering friendship, I didn't immediately go back to work. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I simply sat on the edge of that stiff hospital bed and stared at the opposite wall for what felt like hours. The rhythmic beeping of the monitor was the only sound, a steady metronome counting down the end of something. The end of a childhood filled with striving for approval that would never come. The end of any lingering, foolish hope that one day my parents would wake up and see me. It was a strange sort of calm that washed over me. It wasn't peace. It was the eerie quiet of a battlefield after the final shot had been fired. The part of me that had spent 22 years craving their validation, the little girl who just wanted her parents to be proud of her, she was gone. The casual cruelty of my mother's words hadn't just wounded her, it had vaporized her. In her place was something new, something colder, clearer, and infinitely stronger. My internal monologue wasn't filled with sadness or self-pity. It was a simple, stark, and final realization. A single thought that repeated itself with the clarity of a mathematical proof. It's over. There will be no next time. They will never change. They are who they are. And I have been wasting my life trying to be someone they would love. That thought wasn't depressing. It was liberating. It was as if I had been carrying 100-pound weight on my back my entire life, and in that moment I simply shrugged and let it fall to the ground. The pain from their rejection didn't disappear, but its nature changed. It was no longer an open wound, raw and aching. It transformed. It condensed. It became a small, hard, diamond-like core of energy deep inside me. It was the fuel I never knew I had. I looked at the crumpled hospital bill for $1,850 in my hand. Then I looked at the worn leather notebook on the bedside table, the one that contained the entire business plan for Secure Pay. One represented a debt I couldn't pay. The other represented a future I would build myself. The choice was clear. The path forward was illuminated not by hope, but by a cold, hard certainty. I would not just survive this, I would win. Not for them, not to prove them wrong, but for me, because I was finally, truly, on my own. The next morning, I walked out of that health center and didn't look back. I didn't call my family to tell them I had been discharged. I didn't send them an angry text. I didn't post anything passive-aggressive on social media. I chose silence. My energy was a finite resource, and I decided, from that day forward, that they were no longer worthy of a single drop of it. My focus shifted entirely. I went back to my tiny dorm room, the one I shared with 2 other people, and I sat down at my secondhand desk. My first call was to my team at Secure Pay. I told them the patch was stable and that I was fine. My voice was different. The usual collaborative energy was still there, but it was underpinned by a new authority, a new finality. They felt it immediately. My second call was to my angel investor, Michael Chen. I requested an emergency meeting. That afternoon, in his gleaming office overlooking Boston Harbor, I didn't tell him about my collapse. I didn't mention my family. I laid out a new, brutally aggressive timeline. "The market is heating up," I told him, my voice steady and confident. "Our technology is 3 steps ahead of everyone else, but that window is closing. We need to accelerate our Series A funding round, not in 6 months, now." He studied me for a long moment, his eyes sharp and discerning. He saw the dark circles under my eyes, but he also saw the unwavering fire behind them. He must have recognized the look of an entrepreneur who had just gone all in, who had burned the bridges behind them and had no choice but to advance. He nodded slowly. "All right, Olivia, let's do it. Get me the new pitch deck by Friday." My third call was to Professor Wilson. I updated her on the new plan. She listened patiently, as she always did. When I was finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Something has changed, Olivia. You sound different." "I am?" I replied. "Good," she said simply. "Use it." And I did. The weeks leading up to my graduation became the most productive period of my life. The work was no longer a means to an end, a way to pay the bills. It became my sanctuary. It was the one place where the rules were clear, where effort produced results, and where my value was measured by the quality of my ideas, not by the whims of my family. I poured every ounce of my anger, my hurt, and my newfound resolve into Secure Pay. I worked with a cold, methodical precision. I rewrote code, refined our security algorithms, and polished our pitch deck until it shone. I operated in complete secrecy. My parents would occasionally send a text, usually a picture of Chloe at a polo match or a link to an article about UCLA. The messages were always about her. They never once asked if I was okay after my hospital stay. They never asked about the bill. It was as if the conversation had never happened. I would reply with a single, non-committal word. "Nice," or "cool." My digital silence was a wall I was carefully constructing, brick by brick. I met with some of the biggest venture capital firms in the country. In boardrooms that cost more than my entire 4-year cost of attendance, I, a 22-year-old student, pitched my company to rooms full of men twice my age. The old Olivia would have been intimidated. The new Olivia was fueled by their skepticism. I answered their questions with data. I countered their doubts with logic. I presented my vision with an unshakable confidence born from absolute necessity. And the offers started to come in. Big offers. The kind of numbers that made my hands shake when I saw them in an email. But I kept it all to myself. Jessica knew, of course. My team knew. My mentors knew. But my family, they remained in the dark. They still saw me as the responsible one, the self-sufficient daughter who was probably struggling a bit but would be fine. They had no idea that I was in the middle of closing a $50 million funding round that would value my company at $700 million. Part of me wanted to tell them, to throw my success in their faces, but the new, colder part of me knew better. Revealing it now would be a plea for attention, a cry of, "Look at me, see what I did without you." And I was done with that. I wasn't looking for their reaction. I was preparing for my action. The validation I had sought from them for so long had finally arrived, but it came in the form of term sheets and wire transfers. It came from the respect in the eyes of seasoned investors. It came from the loyalty of my team. I had found my worth, and it had absolutely nothing to do with them. So, as graduation approached, I continued my silent, methodical preparations. I completed all my final exams, getting straight A's, of course. I finalized the details of the funding round. And I bought a ticket for the Peter Pan bus from Boston to Connecticut for the day after the ceremony. It felt fitting. It was a quiet tribute to the girl I used to be, and a final, silent act of defiance. My father had told me to take the bus to my graduation, and so I would. But I would be riding it away from them, not towards them, as the CEO of a company that was about to make me a billionaire. They thought they were sending me off on my own. They had no idea I was already gone. Graduation day arrived, bathed in the kind of perfect postcard-worthy New England sunlight that makes you forget winter ever existed. I stood in front of the mirror in my tiny dorm room, adjusting my cap, the crimson and black robes feeling heavy and foreign on my shoulders. Despite knowing my family would now be attending, I stuck to my original plan. The bus ride to campus was quiet, almost meditative. As I watched the familiar streets of Cambridge slide by, I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were an actress about to walk on stage for the final scene of a play. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't excited. I was ready. When I arrived at Harvard Yard, I spotted them almost immediately near the entrance, looking slightly out of place amongst the joyful chaos. My father stood stiffly in his dark suit, looking more like he was attending a board meeting than his daughter's graduation. My mother was the picture of elegance in a pale blue dress, her smile perfectly practiced. And Chloe. Chloe looked bored, scrolling endlessly through her phone. This was the scene they had prepared. The performance was about to begin. I took a deep breath and approached. "You made it," I said, my voice even. My mother's face lit up with a practiced, dazzling smile, the kind she reserved for hospital fundraisers and dinner parties. "Olivia, darling, we wouldn't miss this for the world." She pulled me into a brief, airy hug that smelled of expensive perfume and hairspray. It was a hug designed to be seen. My father offered a firm, businesslike handshake. "The traffic wasn't as bad as we expected," was all he said. Chloe glanced up from her phone for a fraction of a second. "Congrats, sis." The lie hung in the air between us, thick and suffocating. We wouldn't miss this for the world. The same people who, just 2 weeks ago, had told me to take a bus because they were busy buying my sister a Bentley. I later found out the truth from Chloe. She had stumbled across an article about secure pay on a tech blog, saw my picture, and showed it to them. It wasn't a change of heart that brought them here. It was a change in my net worth. They weren't here to celebrate their daughter. They were here to assess their newest, most unexpected asset. As I went to line up with the other graduates, I felt their eyes on my back. They weren't looking at me with pride. They were looking at me with a new kind of calculation. The stage was set. They believed they were in control, here to play the role of the proud, supportive family for a few hours before getting back to their real lives. They had no idea that the script had been completely rewritten. The ceremony was a blur of tradition and speeches, pomp and circumstance, the sea of black caps and crimson robes. I sat there, calm and centered, listening to the university president talk about the future. My future. When it was my turn to walk across the stage, I felt a strange sense of peace. I could feel thousands of eyes on me, but the only ones I was aware of were the three pairs sitting in the third row. Olivia Williams, the dean of the business school, announced, his voice booming across the yard. Graduating summa cum laude with highest distinction in business administration. I walked to the center of the stage, shook his hand, and accepted my diploma. It was heavy in my hand, a tangible symbol of 4 years of relentless work. I expected him to move on to the next name, but he didn't. He held up a hand for silence, a twinkle in his eye. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice now carrying a different kind of weight, "I have the extraordinary privilege of making a special announcement today." A murmur went through the crowd. "It is my honor to inform you that Ms. Williams is not only our class valedictorian, but as of last week, she has been recognized by Forbes magazine as the youngest self-made female billionaire of her generation." A collective gasp swept through the audience. It was a sound I could feel in my chest. Billionaire. The word itself seemed to hang in the air, electric and impossible. The dean continued, his voice ringing with pride. "She is the founder and CEO of Secure Pay, a revolutionary financial technology company that, following its latest funding round, is now valued at over $1 billion. The gasp turned into a roar. The applause was deafening, a wave of sound that washed over me. It wasn't just polite clapping, it was a genuine, thunderous ovation. Through the wall of noise, I allowed myself to look at my family. And the sight was everything I had imagined, and more. My father had literally dropped his program. The glossy pages were scattered at his feet like fallen leaves. He was staring at me, his mouth slightly agape, his carefully constructed composure completely shattered. My mother was frozen, her perfectly manicured hand covering her mouth, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and utter disbelief. And Chloe. For the first time all day, she was completely disengaged from her phone. She was on her feet, along with everyone else, staring at me not with boredom, but with something that looked remarkably like awe. The dean gestured for me to take the podium for my valedictory address. As I stepped up and adjusted the microphone, the applause slowly subsided. I looked out at the sea of faces, at my beaming friends Jessica and Professor Wilson in the front row, and then, for a brief moment, back at my stunned family. My father was now fumbling to pick up the pages of his program, his hands visibly shaking. I unfolded my speech. The speech I had written weeks ago had been discarded. This was a new one, written the night before. 4 years ago, I began, my voice clear and steady, amplified across the historic yard. Many of us arrived here with dreams, ambitions, and more than a little fear. We came from different backgrounds, with different resources, and different support systems. I paused, letting the words sink in. Some of us were fortunate enough to have families who could pave the way, who could provide a safety net for every stumble. Others had to learn to build their own safety net, and then had to learn how to fly without one at all. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I spoke about perseverance. I spoke about the importance of self-belief, especially when those who are supposed to believe in you the most are preoccupied. I talked about how sometimes the greatest motivation doesn't come from encouragement, but from neglect. How being told you have to handle things on your own can be the most powerful gift you ever receive, because it forces you to discover a strength you never knew you possessed. Success, I said, looking out towards the section where my family sat, is not measured by the applause you receive at the finish line. It's measured by the distance you had to run to get there, and by how many times you had to pick yourself up along the way when there was no one there to help you. I never mentioned them by name. I didn't have to. Every single person in that audience who knew me, even a little, knew exactly who I was talking about. And my family, they knew. I could see it in their faces. The shock had been replaced by a dawning, horrified comprehension. This wasn't a celebration they were a part of. This was a verdict. My journey here, I concluded, involved building a company between classes, tutoring sessions, and food delivery shifts. It involved discovering that the validation I thought I needed from the outside world was actually inside me all along. So to the class of 2023, I say this: find that validation within yourselves. Build your own success. Build your own worth. And never, ever let anyone else tell you that you need to take the bus, when you know you have the power to build a rocket ship. As I finished, the entire graduating class rose to their feet. The applause was even louder this time. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated triumph. I had not just won, I had rewritten the entire story. And as I walked off that stage, leaving my family sitting there amidst the celebration, looking smaller and more insignificant than I had ever seen them, I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a whole new chapter. A chapter where, for the first time, I was the one holding the pen. The moment the ceremony ended and the caps flew into the air, the facade my family had so carefully constructed began to crack. As I was mobbed by cheering classmates and professors offering handshakes and stunned congratulations, I could see them trying to push through the crowd. There was a frantic, desperate energy about them that I had never seen before. My father, usually so composed, looked like a man trying to catch a train that was already pulling away from the station. Before Jessica or Professor Wilson could even reach me, my father got to me first. He grabbed my arm, not in a celebratory embrace, but with a shockingly firm grip. "Olivia, we need to talk." "Now," he hissed, his voice low and urgent, pulling me away from the joyful crowd into a space behind a large oak tree. My mother and Chloe hurried behind us, their faces a mixture of confusion and anxiety. This was it, the moment I had been waiting for, the moment of reckoning. I stood there, calm and silent, waiting for the apology, for the admission of guilt, for any sign of remorse. I was a fool to expect it. My father didn't hug me. He didn't say, "Congratulations." He didn't say, "I'm proud of you." He launched directly into crisis management mode, as if my success was a hostile takeover he needed to control. "Listen to me very carefully," he began, his CFO voice in full effect. $1 billion. You have no idea the kind of target that puts on your back. The legal and financial exposure is enormous. We need to act immediately to protect the family's assets. I just stared at him, my expression unreadable. The family's assets. He was already claiming my life's work as his own. "Your mother and I discussed it on the way here," he continued, completely oblivious to my silence. "The first and most critical step is to establish an irrevocable trust for Chloe." I blinked slowly. "A trust? A trust?" I repeated, my voice flat. "Yes," he said, nodding as if this were the most logical conclusion in the world. "To ensure she's taken care of for life. She doesn't have your disposition for business. She's more creative, more sensitive. She needs to be protected. Setting aside, say, $30 million for her would be a prudent first move. It's a drop in the bucket for you, and it's the right thing to do as a family. $30 million. The audacity of it was breathtaking. It was so profoundly, grotesquely transactional that I almost laughed. My success wasn't a reason for celebration. It was a resource to be plundered. My entire 4-year struggle, the sleepless nights, the ramen noodles, the collapse in the library, it had all culminated in this moment, where my father was trying to divert a portion of my victory to the very person for whom I had always been sacrificed. He wasn't seeing his daughter. He was seeing a new revenue stream. I looked past him at my mother, who was nodding in agreement, her face a mask of practiced concern. I looked at Chloe, who just looked confused, overwhelmed by the numbers being thrown around. And I looked back at my father, the man who had taught me the value of $1 by refusing to give me any. I let the silence hang in the air for a few heartbeats. I let him stand there in his self-assured arrogance, believing he was still in control. And then, I gave him my answer. No. It was just one word, spoken quietly, without anger, without emotion. But it landed in the space between us with the force of a physical blow. My father's face contorted, first with disbelief, then with a dark, rising anger. What did you just say? I said no, I repeated, my voice as cold and hard as the resolve that had been forged in that hospital room. This isn't a negotiation, Olivia, he snapped, his composure finally breaking. This is about family. We take care of each other. That was the line, the one that finally made the ice in my veins boil. Take care of each other? I asked, my voice dangerously soft. Is that what we're calling it now? Tell me, Dad, where was this take care of each other philosophy when I was lying in a hospital bed a few months ago, asking for less than $2,000 to cover a medical bill? His face went pale. My mother flinched as if I had struck her. I wasn't finished. Where was the family concern then? Or were you too busy at a horse auction, buying Chloe a $40,000 polo pony? Don't you dare stand here in the shadow of my success, a success you had absolutely nothing to do with, and lecture me about family. The shock on their faces was absolute. The responsible daughter, the one who never talked back, was gone. How dare you? My mother finally stammered, finding her voice. After everything we've done for you. Everything you've done for me? I asked, a real bitter laugh escaping my lips. What exactly was that? Was it when you skipped my high school valedictorian speech for a piano recital? Or was it 2 weeks ago, when you told me to take a bus to my own Harvard graduation, a ceremony you had no intention of attending until you saw my name in a headline? I took a step closer to my father. You want to talk about finances? Let's talk. I put myself through this university. I built my company with my own sweat and my own mind, without a single dollar of your money or a single word of your advice. You are not my financial advisor. You are not my partner, and you will not touch my company. The transformation from shock to outright panic was immediate and ugly. The realization that they had no legal claim, no leverage, no control whatsoever, hit them like a tidal wave. This is a joke, right? My father said, his voice now laced with a desperate, pleading quality. Olivia, you're being emotional. You're not thinking clearly. For the first time in my life, I said, looking at all three of them, I am thinking with perfect clarity. The panic escalated into a frantic, messy scramble to regain control. It was like watching a well-rehearsed play descend into chaos. First came the guilt-tripping. How could you do this to your mother? My father demanded. You're breaking her heart. My mother, on cue, produced a few tears, dabbing at her eyes with a silk handkerchief. When that didn't work, they moved to threats. You're making a huge mistake, Olivia, my father warned, his voice turning hard again. You'll regret turning your back on your family. Then came the bargaining. Okay, okay, my mother said, stepping forward. Perhaps we were a bit hasty. Let's all just calm down. We can all go out to a nice dinner tonight at Le Maire. Your father made reservations. We can celebrate and talk this through. Talk it through. She meant to negotiate my surrender. The final stage was the most pathetic. The blame shifting. This is your fault, my father suddenly yelled, pointing a shaking finger at me. You were always so secretive, so stubborn. You deliberately kept this from us to hurt us. You have ruined this family. Ruined this family. The irony was so thick I could taste it. They had spent 2 decades creating a system of profound inequality and emotional neglect. And now that the system had backfired, I was the villain. I was the one who had set the fire, simply because I had refused to keep burning. I looked at their panicked, contorted faces, and I felt nothing. No pity. No anger. Just a vast, empty distance. They were strangers. Strangers who happened to share my DNA. I turned my back on them without another word and walked away, leaving them standing under the oak tree, their perfect family portrait shattered into a million pieces. As I walked back towards the cheering crowd, my phone started to buzz in my pocket. A text from my father, then another, then a call from my mother. I didn't look. I just kept walking, towards the sound of my real family, Jessica, my team, my mentors, who were waiting for me with genuine smiles and open arms. The battle was over. The war for my own life had just been won, and the frantic, desperate noise of their defeat was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. Walking away from them felt like breaking the surface of the water after being held under for too long. The first breath of air was sharp, clean, and dizzyingly liberating. The frantic buzzing of my phone in my pocket was a distant annoyance, the last desperate signals from a world I was leaving behind. I didn't slow down. I didn't look back. I walked straight into the embrace of my real family, the one I had built myself. Jessica reached me first. She didn't say anything. She just wrapped her arms around me in a fierce, protective hug. It was the kind of hug that says, I'm here. You're safe. I've got you. Over her shoulder, I could see Professor Wilson, her eyes shining with a pride that was so genuine, so unconditional, it made my own eyes well up. My small team of developers, the ones who had been in the trenches with me, were there too, their faces beaming with shared triumph. This was real. This was earned. This was a celebration, not a negotiation. Let's get out of here, I whispered to Jessica. Our party is waiting. That night, we celebrated on the rooftop bar of a hotel overlooking the Charles River. There was no tense, transactional dinner at Le Maire. There were no calculated conversations about trusts and assets. There was just joy. Pure, unadulterated joy. We popped champagne, we laughed until our sides hurt, and we told stories about the early days of secure pay. The all-nighters, the bugs we thought would kill us, the cheap pizza that fueled our code. These people weren't just my employees or my mentors. They were the ones who had seen me at my lowest. They had believed in my vision when it was nothing more than a few lines of code and a crazy idea. They had offered support without demanding anything in return. When Michael Chen, my investor, raised his glass, he didn't toast to the company's valuation. He toasted to me. To Olivia, he said, his voice resonating with respect. Who proved that resilience is the single greatest asset an entrepreneur can have? They were celebrating my character, not just my bank account, and that was a difference my biological family would never understand. The frantic calls and texts from my parents continued throughout the night. It was a digital siege. I finally pulled out my phone and looked at the barrage of notifications. From Dad. Olivia, pick up the phone. This is not how we resolve family matters. You are being incredibly childish. From Mom. Your father is very upset. I'm very upset. You embarrassed us today. You need to call me immediately. From Dad. I'm warning you, Olivia. Don't make a foolish decision you'll regret. We can still fix this if you are reasonable. From Mom. I can't believe you would speak to your father that way, after he's provided for you your entire life. We deserve some respect. The gaslighting was so predictable, so transparent. They weren't sorry for what they did. They were sorry they got caught. They were terrified because the person they thought they could control forever had just walked off the chessboard. I took a deep breath. For the first time in my life, I wasn't going to back down. I wasn't going to let guilt be the weapon they used against me. I chose myself over their comfort. This moment, this was a turning point for me. If you support this powerful decision she's making, drop a flexed bicep emoji in the comments right now to send her some strength for the journey ahead. Because that strength was exactly what I needed. I didn't reply to their texts. Instead, I opened my phone's contact list. I found my father's name. I hesitated for only a second, then I pressed the button. Block. I found my mother's name. Block. It was a simple digital act, but it felt like slamming a steel door shut. It was a declaration. You no longer have access to me. You no longer have the power to hurt me. My final text that night was to Chloe. It simply said, I know you were probably just caught in the middle of all that. If you ever want to talk, for real, without them, you have my number. Then I put my phone on silent, put it away, and went back to the party. Back to my people. Back to my life. I felt lighter than I had in years. The weight of their expectations, a burden I had carried since I was a child, was finally gone. I was free. But I knew the storm was far from over. Blocking their numbers was just the first step. The fallout from my declaration of independence was still to come, and I would need every ounce of this newfound strength to face it. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid. I was ready to build my future, and I would do it surrounded by a family that wasn't defined by blood, but by loyalty, respect, and a shared belief in building something amazing, together. That was my new foundation, and it was unbreakable. It's been 2 years since that day at Harvard. 2 years since I walked away from my old life and stepped into this new one. I'm writing this from my office on the 85th floor of a skyscraper in Manhattan. The view of the city skyline still takes my breath away, a daily reminder of how far I've come. On the wall opposite my desk is a framed cover of Forbes magazine. It's me, looking straight at the camera with the headline, "The Billion-Dollar Underdog, How Olivia Williams Rewrote the Rules." Secure Pay has grown beyond my wildest dreams. We're no longer a startup. We're a global institution with offices in New York, London, and Tokyo. Our technology is helping to shape the future of finance. But the achievement I'm most proud of isn't the $5 billion valuation or the industry awards. It's the Secure Pay Foundation. Using 10% of our profits, we provide full-ride scholarships to students who, like me, are fighting for their education without a safety net. We cover tuition, housing, books, everything. We make sure they can focus on their dreams, not just their survival. The fallout from my graduation day was predictable. My parents, cut off from the new source of wealth they thought they could control, had to face a reality they had long ignored. My father's reckless spending, which had always been subsidized by his high salary, became unsustainable without the prospect of my fortune to back it up. They had to sell the sprawling Connecticut house. They had to downgrade their cars. They had to learn the meaning of the word budget, a lesson my father had tried to teach me with a book years ago. The biggest change, however, was in Chloe. Without the $30 million trust she had been promised, and without the endless financial cushion, she was forced to stand on her own 2 feet for the first time in her life. She deferred UCLA. She turned down the Bentley. She spent a year working with the Marine Conservation Program in Hawaii, scrubbing boats and tagging sea turtles. She came back a different person, humbled, grounded, aware. About 6 months ago, she called me. It wasn't a text. It was a call. Her voice was hesitant. "Liv," she said, using my childhood nickname. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything. I was so caught up in my own little world, I never saw what was happening to you. I was blind. And I'm so sorry." It was the first genuine apology I had ever received from a member of my family, and it opened a door. Not back to the way things were, but to something new. We started talking. Really talking. For the first time, we were just sisters, not rivals in a twisted competition we never agreed to enter. She now works for my foundation, helping to select scholarship recipients. She has a passion and a drive I never knew she had. We are slowly, carefully, building a relationship based on honesty and mutual respect. As for my parents, our relationship is distant. Civil, but distant. I unblock their numbers after a year, but the conversations are brief and superficial. There are boundaries now. Steel-enforced boundaries. They are no longer a part of my daily life. Forgiveness, I've learned, doesn't mean forgetting. It means choosing not to let the past poison the future. The most powerful lesson I've learned on this journey is that my family, in their own dysfunctional way, gave me the greatest gift I could have ever received. It wasn't money. It wasn't supported. It was neglect. Their indifference forced me to become resilient. Their lack of faith in me forced me to find faith in myself. Every time they overlooked me, they were inadvertently forging the very independence that led to my success. They taught me that your worth is not determined by the people who are supposed to love you. It's determined by you. It's built, not given. Just yesterday, I was reviewing the new class of scholarship recipients for the foundation. I came across the file of a young woman from Arizona. She had a 4.0 GPA, wanted to study computer science, and was working 3 jobs to save up for her first semester. A familiar story. I smiled, picked up my pen, and wrote a note on her file for my team. It said, "Let's make sure she knows she won't have to take the bus to her graduation. We're sending a car." My journey has been a painful one, but I wouldn't change a thing. It led me here, and it taught me that sometimes the greatest success comes from believing in yourself, especially when no one else does. So now I want to ask you, have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with the people you love to protect yourself? How did you navigate those painful, necessary conversations? Share your experience in the comments below. Your story might be the one that gives someone else the strength to find their own voice. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button, subscribe for more stories about finding your power, and share this with someone who might need to hear it. Thank you for listening.